You're listening to the Sermon Podcast for the Peak Church, located in Apex, North Carolina. Our church is striving to welcome all who are feeling disconnected from God. And so our hope is that over the next several minutes, you will connect with the God that we are talking about, and you'll resonate deeply with the life that this God wants for you. We hope you enjoy.
The scripture passage for today is from the book of Luke, chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. Someone from the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus said to him, "Man, who appointed me as judge or referee between you and your brother?" Then Jesus said to them, "Watch out, guard yourself against all kinds of greed. After all, one's life isn't determined by one's possessions, even when someone is very wealthy." Then he told them a parable. A certain rich man's land produced a bountiful crop. He said to himself, "What will I do? I have no place to store my harvest." Then he thought, "Here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. That's where I'll store all my grains and goods. I'll say to myself, 'You have stored up plenty of goods, enough for several years. Take it easy. Eat, drink, and enjoy yourself.' But God said to him, 'Fool, tonight you will die. Now who will get the things you have prepared for yourself?' This is the way it will be for those who hoard things for themselves and aren't rich toward God." This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God.
In the past 8 years, I have lived in about 15 different homes. Obviously, some of those homes were very short-term living arrangements, but I actually am only counting the ones that required me to move all of my belongings to a new location. Many of you know that I just moved again this summer into home number 15, and let me tell you, I hate moving. I hate packing. I hate unpacking. Most of all, though, I hate actually moving the stuff, moving the furniture, moving the boxes. It is the worst, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels that way. But I will say, one good thing about moving a lot is that multiple times each year over the past 8 years, I have had to touch everything that I own. And because I hate moving, every time I pack and unpack, I get to ask myself, is this item really worth moving? Do I actually want this? Do I use it? Does it have sentimental value? Is this item really worth moving, or can I pass it along to someone else? And I don't say that to tell you that I'm some kind of minimalist whose house is always perfectly tidy and who just loves getting rid of things. The clothes packed in my closet, 2 dressers, and also all over the floor would beg to differ. But I say this to lead with honesty as your pastor. Y'all, I have way too much stuff. I have way more than I need at home. And even after doing a purge twice a year for almost a decade, I still find myself wanting more. My inbox is flooded right now with the back to school, Labor Day sales, and I find myself tempted to go shopping just for the joy, the fun of bringing something new home. Anybody else in that season right now? Yeah. This month, we have been exploring these different types of staleness or areas of our lives that are feeling dull, boring, maybe need some kind of rejuvenation. And we've talked about staleness in our spiritual lives. We've talked about it at work. Today, we're going to talk about staleness when it comes to our possessions. Why do so many of us struggle with this urge to consume, to hold on to what we already have and collect more? And what do we do when our possessions get out of control? They start adding stress and chaos to our lives instead of joy. Most importantly, what kind of relationship does Jesus call us to have with wealth, with material goods? To answer those questions, we're going to have to dive into our scripture passage for today, which, if you want to follow along, is from Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 13. Although before we get to verse 13, we're going to take a quick trip back to verse 1, where we find out that Jesus is actually teaching in front of a crowd of thousands of people when this man, in verse 13, decides, rather boldly in front of everyone, to ask Jesus for a favor. Tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. To our modern eyes and ears, maybe doesn't sound like a super unreasonable request for two brothers to receive equal shares of their parents' estate. But in the ancient world, this was a huge ask. At that time, inheritance was decided by the oldest brother, the firstborn son. And according to the inheritance laws in Deuteronomy, that firstborn son would get a double portion because he was the heir to the family's estate. And because of that, he also would be the one responsible for caring for the parents and managing the household. So the double portion was like the extra compensation for the added responsibility and, quite frankly, the financial burden of managing aging parents and a household. So if there were two brothers, let's just say, it would get divided like this. The youngest brother would get 1/3, and the oldest brother would get 2/3 to get double the portion of the inheritance. Now, this younger man who comes to talk to Jesus, he clearly knows the Mosaic law, but doesn't like it because he wants the inheritance split in half. He sees Jesus as a rabbi, as a teacher, and therefore qualified to make this legal ruling, which, of course, Jesus immediately says, man, I am not getting involved in that. But again, in our modern day, right, where our household, our estate, our inheritance, it's not necessarily tied to birth order or gender. You can really divide it up however you wish. You can even leave it to somebody who's not blood related to you. This might seem to us like kind of a strange process. But what's really happening in this moment is this man is asking Jesus for access to something that he is not entitled to and he does not need. He is not taking on the extra burden of managing the household, of taking care of the parents. He doesn't need the extra money. So he's just asking for more for the sake of having more, or maybe, as brothers go, just to spite his older brother. We don't really know what his intentions are, but clearly Jesus knows something about his heart, because he immediately turns this into a lesson for the whole crowd gathered there about the dangers of greed and desiring more than we actually need. Jesus tells this parable of a man who was already rich when his land produced a bountiful harvest far beyond what he needed to survive, let alone live a good, comfortable life. And the man realizes that his harvest is so bountiful that he doesn't have space to store it all, but he's like, oh no, I got a plan. I got this. I will tear down my tiny barn and build a bigger barn so I can keep all my stuff. And you know what? I'm going to be set for years. I'm not going to have to work. I can eat, drink, be merry until tragedy strikes. Right? He dies that very night. All that harvest he selfishly saved up when he didn't need it in the first place doesn't even get to benefit him when his life is cut short. Now who will get the things? Who will inherit the things you have prepared for yourself? Jesus asks. Now, if we take this passage out of context, it might seem a little drastic, right? Is Jesus saying that we shouldn't have savings accounts or an emergency fund? Is Jesus saying that we shouldn't plan for the future or unexpected hardships? No, he's not saying that. There was nothing wrong with the rich man having a backup plan, right? Having grains and goods stored in a barn in case one year the harvest was not bountiful, right? The problem is that the rich man already had what he needed stored away for a rainy day. And when he found himself with even more, his first thought was to keep it all for himself, rather than share it with others who might not have a barn full of food at home. Slowly but surely, Thomas and I are getting settled into our new home number 15. And I've realized this is actually the biggest home I've lived in the past 8 years. It's not huge by any means, it's just the two of us. But the extra space has certainly been notable and helpful for sorting through and rehoming all the wedding stuff we've accumulated over the past year. But I still feel like I hardly use most of the house. And as it turns out, this is actually not a unique experience. Over the past decade, starting in about 2013, UCLA did a study on family life in America, and they had some middle-class families track what rooms in their house they were in, and they made maps of where people spent their most time in their homes. And unsurprisingly, the kitchen was very popular, the dining room, the living room, right? These gathering places were very popular. But what they found was that the average American family only uses 40% of their home. 40%. And not only that, but 50 years ago, the average size of a house was just under 1,000 square feet. Now, it is over 2,600 square feet. 50 years ago, the average household size, so number of people in the house, was about 3.3. Now it's dropped to 2.54. Our households are getting smaller and smaller, but our homes are getting bigger and bigger. And as our homes get bigger, we fill them with stuff. The same study found that the average American home contains 300,000 items. And as someone who has recently touched all of my belongings yet again, I think that's correct. I do think that that number is probably right. When our houses get full of our 300,000 or more items, then where do we go next? We start putting stuff in the garage. That same study found that 25% of homeowners with 2-car garages can't even fit 1 car inside them. Yeah, anybody relate? I'm seeing some giggles. And when we've exhausted the storage space in the house, and when we've exhausted the storage space in the garage, where do we go next? Storage units. Yes, there are over 50,000 storage facilities in America. That is 5 times as many Starbucks cafes. 50,000. That sounds a lot like a modern day version of building bigger barns, doesn't it? We have a serious problem with consumption and accumulating stuff in this country. And again, to be clear, much like having savings accounts and planning for the future are not inherently evil, neither is having a storage unit if you need one. It can be quite helpful, actually, if you are moving and perhaps your closing dates don't quite line up correctly, or maybe when someone passes away and you find yourself with a home full of furniture and belongings that you have nowhere to put. But most of us don't really have a reason to have long-term storage. I know I don't, but I do have a storage unit. It was necessary for a season. It was. When my mom passed away, I suddenly found myself with a bunch of stuff that I had nowhere to go. Furniture, paperwork that needed to be gone through, sentimental items. And my family, who lives far away, also wanted to go through this stuff. And we needed just time to grieve before we dealt with it, right? It made sense for that season. But that was 5 years ago, and that stuff is still sitting in that storage unit. I don't need most of it. I'm clearly not using any of it because it's not in my house. And quite frankly, I don't even remember most of the stuff that is in there. So I'm definitely not missing it either. And even worse, it's costing me money to pay for storage. The cost of that storage unit has actually tripled in the 5 years I have had it. Having more stuff than I need is taking a toll on multiple areas of my life. Mentally, it's always lingering over my head. Oh, I need to go deal with that. I need to go deal with that. But the task feels so big, I don't know how to start. Financially, it is taking a toll because, again, I'm paying for it with no real value because I don't even know what's in there. And for you, it might not be a storage unit, but maybe it's your garage that you can't park in. Maybe it's your bonus room filled with toys that your children have long since outgrown. Maybe it's your closet full of clothes that you don't wear or that don't fit. Or maybe it is your junk drawer filled with every bit and bauble you've ever had, just in case I need it. We all have this urge as humans, right? We all have a little bit of that rich man's selfishness to hold on to what we have no matter what. And we live in a culture that's obsessed with having the biggest, the best, the newest thing all the time. That new phone, the fancy car, the latest fashion. And it would be easy for me to just stand up here, even as honest as I've been about how I struggle with this too, and say, well, don't be selfish. Get rid of some stuff. Think of others when you have more than you need. But I know that that's not really all that helpful. Sometimes when we think about how much we have stored away in our own version of a bigger barn, the natural reaction is to guilt or shame, to feel bad about it. I do believe that Jesus probably calls us fools, just like he did the rich man when we have more than we need. But I also know that the end goal is not to feel bad, but to actually do something about it and live differently. So I want to help. I want to offer you some things that you can try to maybe change the way that you think about or interact with your possessions. This is my crash course for what to do when you realize that you have too much stuff. Number one, you got to be honest. You got to take inventory of what you have and what you actually use. Clothing for me, I've already said, is a big category, includes shoes. Do not ask me how many pairs of shoes I have. I will not tell you. Clothing is a big category for me of stuff that I have really way more than I need, and I keep wanting to add to it. So one of the things I started doing in my own closet is when I have everything hung up and the front of the shirt is this way, I've started doing this thing where when I wear it, wash it, and hang it back up, I hang it the other way. So I can see what I'm actually wearing, right? Because otherwise I just walk into my closet and I go, oh my God, my friend got me that shirt. And I remember when I wore that one time and it all feels like it needs to stay. But I can't lie about the fact that in 6 months, I haven't turned this shirt around once, right? You've got to be honest about what you have and what you're actually using. Maybe for you, you're the kind of person who just gets bored of having the same stuff all the time, and you want to have that joy, that excitement of bringing something new into the space. When I was a preschool teacher back in the day, one of the things we did with the kids, actually, was we made sure in the classroom each week to rotate their toys, so it wasn't the same toys out every week. And I'm here to tell you that you, as an adult, can rotate your own toys. Maybe one thing that you can try is not having everything out all at once, but actually putting some things away, storing it away, and then when you bring it out for the next season, it feels like it's a new thing entering your space. Lastly, and maybe most importantly, don't be afraid to say goodbye to some things, especially the things that you don't use. When you go home to go declutter, to simplify your life, whatever bigger barn you find yourself with, please don't throw your excess stuff in the garbage. It wouldn't have been good if the rich man had a bountiful harvest and just let it all rot. It wouldn't have been any different than him storing it in the barn. Because the real problem, right, is that he didn't share. He didn't share with those in need. So same goes for you. When you're emptying your barn out, give stuff away, donate it, even sell it if you need to. But do your best to make sure it goes to a new home and not the landfill. One of the other consequences of our consumer-driven culture is that we produce so much more trash than other countries. And there are people in our own neighborhoods who could benefit from the things that we no longer need. There's a great Facebook group called Buy Nothing Wake County that is spectacular for getting rid of the things that you don't need anymore that can immediately bless somebody who might need it. Some people will do little challenges in there to see how long they could go without actually buying anything. It's a lot of fun. It's a good community. And most importantly, it's an opportunity for you to let go of the thing you don't need and for someone else to be blessed by it. Most importantly, wherever you start on this process, start small. These kinds of tasks can be really overwhelming, and depending on the kind of thing that you're trying to declutter, can also stir up a lot of emotions. I may not have touched my storage unit for 5 years, but I know that when I go open it up, it's going to bring back all the feelings, right? Start small. Start with one drawer, one closet, maybe one room. Do it in stages. Maybe get some help. Bring a friend, a little accountability person there for you so that you finish it, because once you take it all out, it has to go somewhere, right? It always gets worse before it gets better, but it is worth doing to really simplify your life and prioritize what's important for you to have and share the things you don't need with others. The truth of the matter is this: we accumulate all this stuff, money, material possessions, whatever it is for you. We really accumulate it. We hold on to it because we're afraid of something. Maybe you're afraid that your needs won't be met, that you're going to need that thing again and you're not going to be able to replace it. And to be clear, I know some of us have really good reason to fear that. But some of us are just afraid that we won't be relevant. We won't be part of the group if we're not keeping up with the Joneses. Some of us are afraid that we are what we have. We're defined by our possessions. It's a marker of success and goodness. And so we're just afraid that if I don't have that, if I'm not keeping up with what my neighbors have, then I'm somehow behind or less than. Some of us are just by ourselves afraid that we're missing out on the next best thing. But friends, when we just hold on to a bunch of stuff we don't actually need, what we're really missing out on is the opportunity to be in community with one another and ultimately be the church. In Acts chapter 4, we get this picture of the brand new church. And the Spirit has blessed them with this gift of community, of holding all things in common, sharing all their resources so that nobody had to build a bigger barn because they could rely on one another to share, to fill in the gaps when someone was in need, knowing that it would be reciprocated when it was my turn to need something from someone else. Ultimately, how you think about your possessions and your wealth really demonstrates what you believe about God and how God provides. Making sure that your needs are met, being able to live comfortably and with some margin for leisure and emergencies, planning for the future but not hoarding, these are all good things. But if you make the same mistake as the rich man in the parable and think that you can secure your future all by yourself, you've made yourself into your own God. Just a few verses after this, Jesus is still talking to the crowd, and he says, "Wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also." How we relate to our wealth, to our possessions, reveals who we are and what we love. If we find ourselves in excess with things we don't need, with money we don't need, and our first thought is, how can I keep this for myself? What we're showing is that we really love ourselves. If we find ourselves with excess, with things we don't need, and our first thought is to share it with our neighbors, we're showing that we love our neighbors, and by loving our neighbors, we're loving God as well. Wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Don't let your heart be lost in the clutter. For some of you, the invitation today is to actually go home and simplify your life. Declutter, get rid of some things, take ownership of your spaces, and I know I'm one of them. Me and my storage unit, I need to get on it. But for some of us, that invitation actually goes deeper. For some of us, the invitation today is to step out in faith, to trust God to provide, to lean on the church to provide, to share with others and let others share with you, and ultimately to be content with what you already have, with what God has already given you. Friends, may we be the church with and for one another, sharing what we have so that none go without.
Thank you for listening to the Peak Podcast. Make sure you subscribe wherever podcasts can be found. For more information on how to get connected with our church, please visit us at thepeakchurch.org.